Hello class, in this video I'm going to go over how to complete the procedure and observations part. So this part of your part 3 in slightly more detail, because after grading a couple of these last night, I noticed that some of them were a bit lacking or a lot lacking in terms of detail, right? So when you're writing a procedure, it's like when you're reading lab steps to do your lab in previous classes, maybe. So it's a very step-by-step series of instructions in order to find density for this particular lab. So we know that density equals m divided by v. So we need to collect the numbers for m, which stands for mass, and v, which stands for volume. So something that will help you out if you're struggling with finding or figuring out how to write the procedure is watching the video play-by-play in step 3. Because about 2 minutes into this video, I start doing the actual procedure, right? So if you're struggling, I would highly recommend you just write down the steps that I do. So I'm going to start off the procedure for you in red here. So in the video, I basically say that this object has water on it, right? And then I'm going to put it on the scale, right? So what am I figuring out right now? Well, I'm figuring out the mass of the scale, or m, in my equation in order to find d, right? So step 1 is just to place brass sample on the scale. And then after I do that, what do I need to do? Well, I need to record the mass. And the reason why I want to record the mass is so that later on I can plug it into my density equation and find the density, right? So that's my first step. In the observations, as I'm doing this, I also mentioned that this brass object gets wet. And I really emphasize that a lot. And you might wonder why, because, well, if you think about it, I want to find the density of just the brass and there's water on it, that's going to mess up my data a little bit, right? Because there's like something extra. It's a little bit dirty. It's got stuff in there that you don't actually want. So an observation would be, as you're doing the lab, what mistakes could you have made that could have messed up your data? Well, one of the mistakes that I made initially was the brass object was not completely dry. This is not ideal because then you have the mass of the water with brass instead of just the brass object. So that's one of the errors that I made. And continuing on to the video, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit for when we're measuring volume. All right. So now I'm doing the steps to measure volume. So I would write down what am I doing right now. So I'm adding water to the graduated cylinder. I would type that in here. What do I do next? So on and so forth. All right. So the next series of steps is going to be you detailing how do we collect the data for volume, or V, in our equation to find density, right? And then the final step after you find volume is, well, what do I actually do to calculate density? Well, after I've recorded the mass, or M, and after I recorded the volume, V, I can then find density, right? There's also another mistake that I made while I was recording the volume of the brass objects. And I want you to figure that out and find that here, right? So a lot of you typed in like, Ms. Kwan made a mistake. I'm like, yes, I know, I made a mistake. I made those mistakes on purpose so that you could have observations. I know this like seems weird and contrived, and that's because it is. Ideally, while you're doing the lab, mistakes naturally happen. And normally, like, you would have something to write on your own without me contriving these errors for you. Right. All right. Hopefully that helps out. Yeah. And if you have any questions over the 3-day weekend, please email me and let me know.